Welcome to the Job Shop Show, where we talk with the owners, suppliers, partners, and customers of custom manufacturers. Listen and learn the secrets of top-performing job shops, the tools, techniques, and backgrounds that have made them successful, all in the quest of raising the bar for custom manufacturing. I'm your host, Jay Jacobs. This episode is sponsored by Paperless Parts, connecting buyers and suppliers of custom manufactured parts. The Paperless platform is a secure, ITAR-compliant, cloud-based manufacturing system for suppliers that reduces the amount of time spent on sales, estimating, quoting, administration, and order processing. It offers seamless integration with the accounting and ERP software tools that shops already use, such as QuickBooks, E2, and JobBoss. Paperless Parts was founded with a mission to make manufacturing more accessible by streamlining the quote-to-cash process. Spend less time quoting and more time selling. Shazam! This is Jay Jacobs. Welcome to the Job Shop Show. Have we got a rock star for you today? Michael Gimbel, the founder and CEO of Gimbal Automation. Would you have had the balls to drop out of Johns Hopkins University and bet on yourself instead? Michael sure did, starting at just 19 years old, a venture-backed 3D printing company pioneering an innovative way to print 3D parts. But a few years in, that didn't work out. And I specifically don't use the word fail here because if you learn something from an experience, it's not a failure. Michael sure did learn, and he pivoted, using the company's machining center to start a design and build machine shop. And then, not satisfied with commercial automation solutions, he created some of his own. Realizing there was more potential in these tools, he again pivoted, focusing on an automation business, Gimbal Automation, which sells to machine shops and other manufacturers. This guy is a winner, and we really dive into the ups and downs of building his companies, the specific lessons he's learned about management and delegation, and how he made real the desire that many shop owners have, indeed, that I had, that of having a product to sell. Let the inspiration begin now. Welcome to the Job Shop Show, Michael.
Awesome. I'm just happy to be here, and I really love the podcast, Jay. I just want to give you a shout out. Paperless Parts, when we were a job shop, was a huge boom for our company and made things a lot easier. And there was one article in particular that you wrote that really opened my eyes to what it was like, running a job shop. Specifically, you talked about how most commonly with a job shop is like 3 big customers, and you're always trying to keep those 3 customers happy and doing all kinds of things that don't necessarily make sense otherwise. And when I read that article, it was really a perspective shift and a real inspiration for us to move into the next phase of our business.
And what phase was that?
Well, I mean, it's probably worth taking through the whole story.
So we'll get into that. First of all, I really appreciate you being on, and you and this conversation are the reason that I started the podcast, because I would have conversations like this on the phone and I would hear some really interesting things and like, oh, wow, I'd really like to share that with some other folks, but it was gone. And on the same thing, the questions that you might ask me or other folks ask me, they tended to be common, or at least sort of the 80-20 rule. So yeah, this is the reason I started the podcast, is so that conversations where I can get to know you and your story and learn some of the things that you've done. Because I've been on LinkedIn and looking at some of your videos is very cool. So let's start back. And you can tell me where you want to start, but I saw you were at Johns Hopkins for mechanical engineering, but only for 2 years, it looked like, or maybe even 1 year.
Just one, yeah.
Okay, so that's pretty different. And as someone who has the talents to get into a school like Johns Hopkins, you decided not to further your education after a year. So how did it start? Were you always a child who liked to tinker and engineering was inevitable?
I kind of think it started like when I was 9, and that's really where I started kind of going crazy, convincing my parents that they shouldn't get me like normal Christmas gifts. I wanted like a woodworking router and a table saw and a bandsaw. And when I was 9, they bought me a drill press for Christmas after a lot of pleading and begging. And that was kind of the trigger for me of, now every single holiday had to turn into a tool. And I, slowly built out a wood shop. 9, I got a bandsaw, or a drill press and a bandsaw. 10, I got a woodworking router. And by the time I was 12, I had a table saw and a whole little wood shop. So, when I was a middle schooler, I couldn't help myself but to go and, watch how it's made as soon as I got home. And I would
Huh.
put it on for hours. I was just obsessed with making stuff. And ever since I was a little kid, I was making cool stuff. And then from there, when I was 12, 13, like the first year of high school, I entered this like engineering competition for high schoolers. And we
Mhm.
had to build like a prosthetic arm basically. And what ended up happening is we won like the national competition, which, was
Hmm.
cool as a freshman in high school.
Yeah.
But the really neat thing that actually came out of that was when I was like 14, through the connections I made there, I found myself at a lab at Children's Hospital in Colorado, where I was running a $1 million EOS 3D printer. I was running a $250,000 Stratasys 3D printer, and I was just at that point super duper obsessed with manufacturing and doing cool stuff. So from there all the way through the rest of high school, I was spending all my time in SolidWorks. I was just designing and building stuff whenever I could, and really that left me in the position when I graduated high school where I wanted to keep going and I wanted to take it to the next level. And when I got into Johns Hopkins, I was excited. There was another kind of biomechatronics lab there, but ultimately, I had a wood shop, in my garage. I could do stuff all the time. I was running these millions of dollars worth of equipment, and the reality is, when I was there, I was just kind of disappointed because I'd gone from here's this $1 million 3D printer you're going to run every other day. Here's this big Stratasys printer, and here's a whole little wood shop in your garage to
Yep.
the kind of normal expected resources you would expect a freshman in college to have. And honestly, I didn't do super well at Hopkins. I wasn't super happy. I didn't get super good grades when I'd been like a straight A student before because it was like my tools had been taken away. And I didn't realize how important it was to me. And I actually ended up dropping out of Johns Hopkins and going to start a venture capital based company. So I invented this new type of 3D printing. We raised $1.3 million and I moved to Los Angeles on a whim. And that was kind of the start of my journey when I was 19.
So you're in school. You said this isn't for me. And how did you raise $1.3 million? How old were you? 19?
19, yeah. And I didn't expect it to go that way. So the very first thing I did was I convinced a bunch of the professors who I'd been working with to give me like 65 grand. And from there, I moved back to Denver, kind of worked on these experimental 3D printers out of my parents' basement and did that until I thought we had enough to raise more capital. And then I moved to the West Coast and what started as, hey, I want to raise $250,000, I don't know, right place, right time. I'm a good talker, very persuasive apparently. That $250,000 raise turned into well over $1 million. And then I basically, ran that company for like 18, 19 months.
So, okay, let's drill into this a little bit. So
Mhm.
you're in Denver. You say, okay, I think I've got what type of 3D printing technology was it?
So at the time, I had invented a new type of 3D printing technology that was essentially a way to put soluble supports on into SLA prints. So it was kind of like the best of both worlds. And I'd made kind of a not a great version, but an okay version out of my parents' basement and had a little automation cell on it.
Okay, so enough proof of concept.
Yeah.
So why Los Angeles? Why did you feel you had to go there? And then I'm always curious because
Mhm.
someone at your age, you don't have a lot of money. I don't know if you knew people there or not. You just packed up and then how did you rent a space? How did that all go?
Well, I was lucky that the people who had given me that, the initial like 65 grand were reasonably well connected. And it was essentially through a connection. It was like, hey, one of the people who knew one of the people who had, invested in like the pre-seed round had said, hey, come to Los Angeles. I'm, friends with the CEO of this company and you can, work out of this makerspace. And I'm, friends with these people with like a whole like ADU, like it was like next to their pool, like an additional unit that you can
Okay.
stay in for like 6 months for free.
Yep.
And honestly, I love my parents, but I didn't want to stay in my parents' basement any longer. That was one thing I really loved about college was just having some distance and growing into my own person. And I just thought, well, this is too good of a shot not to do. And I
Mhm.
also knew, hey, like raising money in California, yeah, sure, it's not the Bay, but in Los Angeles was going to be a lot easier than trying to do it out of Denver.
Right. So what I'm hearing here is that you talk to a lot of people and you actively make connections, sort of how you reached out to me. You said, "Hey, I think be a good candidate to be a guest on the Job Shop show. And you took it in a different path here, it sounds like. And I'll share, there's so much serendipity when you start talking to people. You don't know where it's going to lead, but you know that if you have enough conversations, something good's going to happen. Would you say that that's your experience as well?
Oh, 100%. And I look at all the paths of like how I got here, and all of them are these kind of like random black swan events where, if I hadn't been at this one meeting in middle school, I would have never signed up for this particular engineering competition, which then led to this lab, which then led me to Hopkins, which then led me to raise money. And any of these tiny, tiny events, if they're even slightly different,
Sure.
I don't see myself being in exactly the same place.
Yeah. And some people might say that you got lucky. However, I would say there is definitely luck involved, but you create your own luck. You put yourself in a position to receive luck. And kudos to you for doing that. So you get out to LA and you've got a makerspace to work. Lots of conversations. How did you structure it? Did you go for like chunks of $100,000, or did you have a how was this? Are you one man band? What did you
Yeah, I
do?
mean, at the time it was just me. So it was, I was the company, just me and this technology that we had some provisional patents on. And
Hmm.
basically the way we did it was we got these like, VC kind of like group meetings. So we'd get a bunch of people in one room and I do one presentation. And, that was enough to secure two or three interested parties. And then,
So
at
wait,
that
wait,
point,
how did you get a whole bunch of people in one room to hear just you?
I mean, that was honestly a little bit of luck. And, that one guy that connected me to that space had enough kind of social pull to get those people in the room.
Um,
And I guess he believed in me. So, that was definitely like a bit of luck and a bit of serendipity. And, without that connection, it wouldn't have been as easy. But I had a pretty easy time raising money. It was, running the company with zero management experience. That was the hard part for me, like that
Sure.
first time around. Yeah.
So how long did it take you to raise the money?
4 months.
Okay, so relatively quick. That's
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
And what year was that?
I was 19. So 7 years ago.
Okay, so the money's in the bank. What do you do next?
Well, the first thing I went and did at 19 was I went and I bought a BMW. That's not what I would do now, but that's what I did. And then it was like look for a lease and look for a building to lease and kind of mid-tier flex space. And I generally don't like hash the details too much of my first startup company because so much of it was like me not knowing what I was doing at all.
This is so this is what's interesting, and
Yeah,
if
yeah.
people are listening who've never done this before, one of the beautiful things is hopefully what they hear you talk about and these details that and the same thing. I had a bunch of dead ends on my
Hmm.
path to success. And if we have the conversation and people hear it and they go, oh, and it prevents them from making a dead end
Hmm.
in their first start, then it's a win. So again, one of the reasons we're doing this podcast. So that these details are not unimportant. You negotiated any what I'm trying to get out is what sort of learnings, what things wouldn't you do again that you did?
Yeah, I
Like
mean
buy a BMW.
oh yeah, yeah. I mean that it wouldn't be the start. That was several years too premature. I think that the first thing is I would just reevaluate it, and I have reevaluated just the concept of venture capital. One thing for me that I've really learned is like the company is a huge part of my identity, and it took me a long time to kind of wrap my head around that. Even now that the current company is growing considerably, I still kind of treat it almost like a child I'm raising. It's not so much like part of me anymore, but its own thing. But because of that, I think that honestly, I don't know that from the beginning I was the right fit for venture capital because everything is so focused on growth and building for M&A. And in hindsight, I think I don't really want like a lifestyle company. I want to grow a big successful company that like has an impact. But I don't know that venture was the right choice for me because it wasn't about blowing up and making a lot of money. It was about doing something awesome and being at the helm with 100% ownership is just such a different experience. And I think that's kind of the first thing that, if I was doing it all over again, I'd probably bootstrap it from the ground.
How much equity did you give up when you raised the money for the first company?
Oh, I mean, that was another, me being very naive at the time and not knowing what I was doing. I think by the end of like a couple of rounds, I owned like 40%, which not a great, great situation for sure.
A typical VC.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I was there and And there was a lot of, other things that I wish I would have learned. Like, I think everyone who had invested in the company was super happy that I was like living in the office and working 100 hours a week and, had zero life. And, it was everything to me. And in hindsight, I'm like, I think that actually set me up more for failure than success because
Why?
because it just wasn't sustainable, right? And like, when I hit doing it for 15, 16 months and we started to have real problems, at that point, it was kind of where I almost snapped, right? And said like, well, I don't know how we're going to do this. And I think if I would have had, a healthier outlook and worked a reasonable amount and had like, some kind of social circle or support, I
Mm.
probably wouldn't have cracked as much under the pressure of having to turn things around.
It sounds like you didn't have any capacity in reserve. So
Well, there's that. Yeah.
when something hit, yeah, there's no fuel in the tank. There's no buffer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I didn't know how to hire people, and that was one big pressure from the people on our board is, oh, you got to spend more money, you got to spend more money to get to the outcome faster. And I just hadn't learned how to delegate or manage people or have reasonable expectations. I kind of had the outlook at the time that like everyone should be as dedicated as me, and no one
Mm.
was as dedicated as me, and it's taken me years to learn like that's okay.
Let's take a little detour there. Besides that learning, what else have you learned that has made you more successful in hiring?
It took years for me to become a good manager, and the I think it might make sense just to kind of keep going on the same story. So like
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
the startup, honestly, like I was 19, I had no management experience. Everyone thought it was crazy that people threw $1 million at me. Anyone who wasn't from the tech world, and I kind of ran that company into the ground by just sheer incompetence. Right? I didn't know how to manage people. I didn't know how to really take things beyond just kind of the technician stage of, oh, I go and do something cool. And we did a lot of cool technical stuff, but I didn't know how to run a company yet. And basically, the long story short there is through a convoluted series of events, that the company closed down, traded hands a couple of times, and I essentially ended up with the ashes. So I ended up with a couple of machines and a lease because I had looked for a job and I just couldn't get excited about anything. I really was having kind of an identity crisis because I didn't know. I just wanted to build something, and I felt like I'd been building something for so long, and it failed, and that really was awful. But then when the opportunity came to just pick up the pieces and keep going, I took it, and that meant taking on a lot of debt and a lot of difficulty. Taking over a lease, the space had kind of some damage that had to be fixed,
Mhm.
and we had a couple of machines. There's like a water jet and a VF2, and I kind of looked at what I could sell because now it was just me with a whole bunch of debt, and we turned into a job shop. And that's kind of the typical story. I think all the small shops start out as we're quick turn. We can get you parts faster than anybody. We'll have really fast lead times, but high prices for it. And I did that, and at this point, that was working a little bit. But I was kind of seeing the writing on the wall of, hey, like what I'm really good at is SolidWorks and design and engineering. And we
Mhm.
started to sell more into the engineering market to where half of our business was like engineering consulting. And
When you say engineering consulting, give me an example or two what that is.
yeah, it's like halfway between you know engineering and a machine shop. So the idea is that like behind engineering consulting is that we have the engineers and the machine shop to build the outcome. So most job shops are probably used to like the part is the part is the part. Here's your drawing.
Hmm.
And the difference between that and engineering consulting is, it's like I have this problem and I need a subassembly for it. And we'll pay you X amount of dollars to figure out the problem and solve for the outcome. And we kind of found this unique niche where we would work with kind of small, medium businesses to solve those specific issues, designing the full subassembly, making the components, and then
When you say
delivering the whole thing.
subassembly, what types of products were
Oh,
you
I mean
putting
that's
together?
being in Los Angeles, we're kind of at the art center of the world. So lots of like A and B list artists, which was always interesting because they don't know CAD really or engineering
Right.
drawings or specs. So we would solve problems for them, and then aerospace companies here and there. Obviously SpaceX used to have a lot more presence in Los Angeles than they do now. It was really just kind of whatever came, and really that's kind of the story of every like 1 to 5 person job shop, right? And as we continued, I think I got less and less confident in the job shop work because the margins are tight and it's difficult. And we got more and more into this engineering consulting where it was kind of delivering an outcome.
Yeah.
So, usually there was oil field stuff, there was, artistic sub assemblies, there was aerospace testing fixtures, medical testing fixtures. it's definitely a weird, very niche of a segment of a market.
How do people find you?
But yeah, I mean, that was it, really just a word of mouth, which is kind of every job shop's answer, which isn't a good answer. But I really didn't understand how to do marketing effectively. But I mean, even now that we have kind of a, shadow of a website and all of our Google listings have changed, now that we're primarily running the automation business for, automating CNC mills, we still get RFQs occasionally where it's like, and the vast majority of them, we tell them, hey, like, this isn't really what we do anymore. And there's a couple of legacy customers where we'll quote it out to partner shops and see if we can get something together for them. But there's just like honestly a real need for that kind of engineering consulting and just kind of a fast turn manufacturing services, at least in as dense of a population area as LA.
I want to tie this back to why you left Johns Hopkins. It seems like there's a missed opportunity. And maybe that Johns Hopkins is more the theoretical teaching of engineering, so you have a broader base, and
yeah,
it's not the hands-on, but yeah, talk to that.
Yeah, so like the counselor there was like, look, we have a 97% graduation rate. How dare you do this? And at Hopkins, there's this little crest in one of the buildings. And this crest, like the myth behind it is that if you step on the crest, you won't graduate, right? Everyone is like terrified of this thing. Like I've seen people like trip around it, like, people stay 10 feet away from it because everyone is so set on going through that program. And for me, when I was there, I really expected like I'd be surrounded by people like me who were just obsessed with what they were obsessed with. And I didn't see that, right? I saw a lot of, talented, smart individuals, but people who kind of viewed what they were doing like a job, something to show up to, something to get done, but not, a passion. And in hindsight, very naive point of view, but that's what I expected to see versus what I did. And I think that was combined with, when I was in high school, I was valedictorian. I took all the fancy classes. I even took some college classes, and I was working way too much in this lab. And at that point, I'd been using SolidWorks for like 4 or 5 years, and then the entire first 2 semesters of the main engineering course were learning the basics of SolidWorks. And I was watching the professors struggle to make a square. And we'd have these lessons and like these labs where we were supposed to, make a component off of a drawing, right? And, it was a 2-hour lab and I'd be done in 10 minutes. And I was just like, how long am I going to sit here? Like half the courses I was taking, I'd already taken. And I was like, how long am I going to sit here doing the same thing I already know how to do better than the people teaching it to me? And that's just, I just snapped because I'm one of those people that for better or for worse, like if I don't see myself going in making progress, I get really unsettled. And that kind of discomfort, I felt like I was almost forced to leave and find the next thing.
I have to say, your website for your part making for the Gimbal group looks great, and thanks for
Well,
being
that's actually,
a
yeah, our
customer.
kind of retired website now.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
it's still active. It still looks good. And one of the things as I was looking at the different online presence that you have is, and by the way, I saw some of the art stuff. The Instagram account
Mm.
doesn't look like you're active on that anymore, but some really cool stuff that you were involved in there. You have a lot of, and this plays into your gimbal automation, you have a lot of beyond, I guess, the pure mechanical, and more the electronics. Is that the correct
Yeah,
term
for
you would
sure.
say? Definitely, you've got the electrical, the software, making it a product that works in today's digital world. How did you learn that? Is that
Yeah. So
self-taught as well?
mostly, yeah. I mentioned like, oh, when I was, 9 to, 18, I was building out this wood shop. But I guess what I didn't mention is I built my first CNC machine when I was 12. And there's this book, How to Build a CNC Machine. It was like how to build this kind of plywood piece of junk with stepper motors that, would
Yeah.
cut stuff out because I was just obsessed as a kid of like, how do we get, to be able to make stuff like a printer at home, right? And there's this one kind of funny moment where it was like Christmas when I was 12 that the Xbox 360 had just come out. And, I desperately wanted a MakerBot, the old like crappy 3D
Oh yeah,
printer.
yeah.
And I was a difficult child, to be fair. And my, parents got me this Xbox when I'd just been talking about this MakerBot. And in their defense, I just think they couldn't afford it. They were like $1,500 at the time for a piece of junk. And
Yep.
I was just like gutted when I opened the thing and there's an Xbox there. And because, it wasn't a thing I could make stuff with. So and by the time that I was 18, I built several more CNC machines and 3D printers. And Even when I was about to go to Hopkins, I had this
Okay.
like little tiny CNC machine that was on like, THK actuators with servos on it. And I realized, oh shoot, I can't bring a CNC machine into my dorm. So
Mm,
I spent like 3 or 4 days frantically converting it into a 3D printer that I could bring.
your dorm.
So yeah, so that's just kind of always been there. And then I got a lot more experience doing it, professionally in the startup company. So like building machines from the ground up that run G code is it's always been in the background since I've been a kid.
Okay. It reminds me, I'm sure you're familiar with Dean Kamen.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and his parents were out of town one weekend when he was in high school, and he wanted this CNC machining center in
Hmm.
uh, in his basement, but he couldn't get it down the stairs. It was just too big. So while they were gone that weekend, he hired somebody and they
Oh
lifted the house off of the foundation so they could put the
my
machine
God.
in. So you're you're not alone in your obsessions,
Oh
and you're in
yeah,
good
and
company.
I'm not that crazy, but by the time I was 18, I built 5 CNC machines. And actually the like winter break from Hopkins, I came home and I spent the entire time building a CNC machine, another one because I needed to. And I think there's still a YouTube video up of
What
it.
computer languages do you know, and which ones do you like?
Well, I don't do a ton of that anymore, but at one point I taught myself Visual Basic and then C Sharp, and a little bit of Java, and kind of you learn what you need to. So I played around with Arduino and Raspberry Pi, and obviously G code I know pretty fluently. But at this point, I'm not really writing code anymore.
If
I,
someone was interested, what would you recommend as a path for them to get up to speed
Yeah,
with
I
the
mean,
same
for
way you do?
me, I would actually say code and electrical are not things I like. They're like, a necessary evil to get to an outcome. I want things to be smooth and digital in an ecosystem, but I've just never found them like really fun. And, because of that, I view coding as always an outcome of how do I build that machine? And I kind of learned it on my own when we were smaller, so I could build the machines without having a bunch of, a bunch of staff that were 150 grand a year to code stuff. So for me, I learned, Visual Basic and C Sharp really as ways, before the kind of modern level PLC that was easy to use was where it was. So I could use these like controller devices that were kind of Windows integrated PLCs.
Which
Honestly, I'm just the
companies do
wrong
you?
guy to ask for people who
Well,
love coding because I
yeah,
love
but I want.
machines and it's the path for me to build a machine.
So you mentioned the Raspberry Pi. I don't have any background or ability to integrate a PLC, but let's say somebody just wants to play around and tinker. Is there any path that you could suggest for them to like go buy well, it used to be, I don't know if they're still around, Allen Bradley
Hmm.
PLC, or just the Raspberry Pi, or give us a little
Yeah, I mean,
roadmap.
so the thing that we used originally was this PLC called the K-flop by Dynamotion. And it's really powerful, but it was really difficult to use. You had to write the entire software stack on top of it. And speaking through the lens as just someone who loves building machines. I would say to anyone who loves building machines to just build a bad machine first. Just do something.
Mm,
And from that point of view, like the tools have gotten so much better than they used to be to just get to the outcome of building a machine. We went from, even just in the last couple of years with Gimbal Automation, from doing these, like full software stack development on top of a Windows integrated PLC to a Linux based Raspberry Pi connected PLC that, we had made by a UL certified cabinet PLC maker. And then we actually ended up kind of moving over now, we're just experimenting with, but it'll probably be in like our next gen of products, the Masso control, which is like one integrated system that there's pretty much nothing to do. So if your passion is kind of like mine, it's just building machines. So I would say, get the best system that's the easiest to use that you can afford and just play with it. Because really the playing and the overcoming the numerous frustrations you will run into trying to build something decent is
no,
really where you grow. And for me, I've always been the mechanical mechatronics guy, but the software side and the coding side now, at least at this point, is something I have the pleasure of not doing because I have people who help us who work for me who like doing it a lot more.
I would think though it's easier to manage them because you have some semblance of what they are doing as opposed to somebody who's never coded.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And I definitely like that very, trick member of the leadership team. If you were just coming in from an outside point of view, you'd probably be like, okay, here's Michael's your CTO, he's your CPO, whatever. You probably don't put him at the top. But that said, I like actually running the team and setting the direction. And I'm still trying to strike that balance where I'm not running operations, but I'm directing the vision of the company and helping along with that build the next product that we're going to take to market.
Maybe we can jump into that. First, I want to hear about Gimbal Automation and how that came about. You had a shop making parts.
Yeah.
You have a love of making machines, so sounds like you had a
mhm.
problem or two in the shop and you said, I can make a machine to fix it.
Yeah, that has happened countless times. I mean, the first thing that, we were at 4 employees and doing about 50-50 engineering consulting and just straight job shopping. And then COVID hit, and that just wiped out 100% of the engineering consulting revenue. And I think we saw like 90% revenue decline. So I laid off 2 guys, and one guy went to part-time, and then it was me and him. And for a while, like we were making face shields because that's like what we could sell the highest volume of. So we were doing a little bit of everything here and there. But what surprised me is that after COVID, things actually came back stronger. And the engineering consulting actually kind of came back with a fury because it's like the markets are doing really well, which was nice for a bit. And everyone wanted to get their particular project done. So with that being the case, the company actually went through a little growth spurt and got to 5 or 6 people. And we actually made the decision that we would keep kind of doing job shopping on the side, but mostly we were doing engineering consulting. And the big thing that I struggled with is when you're doing these projects, I mean, the engineering consulting projects are often well over $100,000 in value. They can range from 150 grand to a couple $1 million, and you're spending at least 15 grand a month if you're one of the engineering consulting clients. But these things kind of come and go in waves. We would charge on a retainer basis, and you're either having to collect the retainer or the project gets paused because you're the first variable cost that gets cut. And I really said, hey, I need a product, right? I need something I can sell. I need a widget. Kind of every job shop stream is evolving into a product, right?
Yeah.
And for me, I'd had that background dream of I want to build a 3D printing company. And when I ran the 3D printing company, kind of evolved into a metal 3D printing company with this whole theory that we could use the soluble supports to do basically metal investment casting in an automated process. And I thought, how can I come back? Because I had some money laying around. I had a bit of a war chest. And I thought, hey, I think I can do what Markforged and Desktop Metal are doing, but do it better. And that was kind of the start of, I would say, one of my biggest business mistakes, which is doing the R&D without having done any market research or testing. And I think we spent 4 or 5 months, close to $400,000 of straight profit in pouring into this the coolest machine you've ever seen. So it's a metal 3D printer with like an Aroa style build plate changing robot attached to it. But it's not just a 3D printer for the metal kind of waxy filament. It also had support printing and an integrated CNC milling head, because it turns out that material can mill really easily. So, we get these beautiful parts. We spent like close to 100 grand on these Chinese sintering furnaces, and we could sinter the parts, and we got everything working beautifully after 6 months of intense R&D. And then I tried to test it in the market. We got one of these little, automated Xometry style things, and we reached out aggressively to all of our customers. And it turns out that, the reason that Markforged and Desktop Metal failed is that there's not a market for these parts, right? Like in the metal 3D printing filament based setup. And what little market there is, it's all prototyping, and everyone wants to own the machines. And the machine that we built is good, but it's so hard to deal with the sintering furnaces. It's such a big expense. You need so much space. And there's a lot of expertise here. And I really hit a crossroads of either I'm going to go back to running a venture capital based company and raise $5 or $6 million to make this into a real product, or I've got to do something else. And it took me a while, like a couple months, to realize something else was the answer, because I just don't want to live that life again. And I really love having control of my destiny, right? I like having 100% control of the company and saying, hey, this is where we're going to go. Either get on the boat or don't. And kind of what happened is I looked back and I said, I've had all these side projects over time. And I said, hey, what's the most developed thing that we can do the smallest amount of R&D on that has the biggest gap in the market? And I had built this CNC spindle gripper to like do in-machine CNC machine part tending like 2 years ago. And the really clever part was that it had this little bypass block that meant that it would work on a machine without through spindle air coolant. So there was nothing that would do it. And I said, I'm going to build that.
Why is that important? Why do all the others have that feature?
Yeah. So, I mean, the thing is, the existing companies are really trying to sell into the biggest enterprises and it's a very small subsection of their overall market, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, building a system that can interface with an external air source is annoying and it's difficult. And I think if you're one of the huge automation brands like Shank, you just say, like if a customer wants to automate, buy through Spindle Air, right? But as an individual guy, with 3 people working for me, looking at the existing automation solutions, it was either like, hey, we got to go spend $200,000 on a ROA system or $100,000 on a robot integration, and we need another spindle, right? We don't need to spend $5,000 to $20,000 on an automation system because this just, if that money's there, we're buying a spindle.
Right.
So, I viewed it as like this mid-tier solution. And the reason through Spindle Air or coolant not needing those is important is because, first off, not every machine has them. But secondly, it makes it a drop-in solution. Otherwise, you're going to go spend, even with Haas, like 5, 6, 7 grand to get that all retrofitted to your machine. And instead, we can just sell you a direct solution for 2 grand. So we started selling those spindle grippers, which basically grab a part off the table and load it into an automatic vise. And lo and behold, they started selling. And we'd spent, I don't know, 10 grand on the R&D, some money to start the patent process at that point for the little bypass system. And it really started working. And, at that point, we added automatic air vices. And then the next thing that we really ran into was customers really struggling to install their air, right? Getting the 2 solenoids to work properly to control their gripper and their air vise. So we made a product that just plugged into the back of the machine that we call the instant solenoid kit. It has a little pendant so you can manually trigger them. That made that like a 5-minute install procedure. And that was really the start of Gimbal Automation, in that we realized pretty quickly that just from customer feedback, what people wanted was an ecosystem, right? They didn't just want to buy a gripper and buy an air vise and figure it out. They wanted just to get running easily and ideally on their own, at least like the first kind of customers we were dealing with. And from there, we just started solving problems one at a time. Then the next problem was, how do I program this thing? Because when we first started, there was no program system that made it easy.
Sure.
And then we went to great lengths to make an online program generator that, still to this day is free there on our website. That means that you can just literally plug in, your XY grid dimensions and your stock information and hit generate, and it generates a program that you just upload to your mill, right? So that the loading and unloading of the parts is automated. There's nothing to do. And from there, it really has just been time after time seeing what our customers are struggling with and building a new solution to the problem. Like the biggest turning point after all of this was we built a whole bunch of versions of grippers. We built a whole bunch of different versions to make things easy. But the biggest turning point was when we came out with the 2-op automation system, where you have, not 1 air vise, but 2 air vices and a part flip station. And along with that comes this, macro that looks super long and does everything mathematically in the control. But basically what that let our customers do for the first time is they put this little pallet, about the size and weight of a Kurt vise onto their machine with 2 vices and a flipper. They probe 3 locations, and then they just go into our little program template and they put in like a half dozen variables. And those half dozen variables automatically take the part from grabbing it off the tray, putting it into the first op vise, machining the first operation, and then putting it into the flipper, which flips it over for the second operation. Then re-grab it with the gripper, put it in the second op vise, machine it, and then you have a finished part. So we, for the first time, made it super feasible for like around $10,000 in hardware cost to go and do 100% 2-op automation, which even with a cobot or a robot system, you can't really do that without some kind of external, part flip station or something similar.
And I would encourage people who want to understand that a little better, go to your website. There's some videos and stuff there, but also your LinkedIn profile. You've got lots of little videos that you post on there. And I think that's kudos on that marketing side. The videos are really what demonstrate, it made me understand what the part flipping really entails, and then how you can load multiple parts on a tray. It seems like just such a simple system for automation. It probably also makes it easier to automate lower volumes. So if you've got regular runs of maybe even 100 parts or 50 parts, you can automate them, and there's not a lot of cost to it, where there would be more with a true cobot.
Yeah, and I think we've seen a ton of people saying, hey, why wouldn't I use a cobot? It's a proven solution, blah, blah, blah. And almost every time we're like, your CNC mill is a proven solution. It moves accurately, exactly as it's programmed every single time. The system's super reliable. It's much better precision by an order of magnitude than a cobot system. And we kind of always tell people, hey, you have a robot, you just don't know it. Your CNC mill is the robot you already have. And it's designed to deal with forces and loads that are also orders of magnitude higher than you would see off a cobot. A cobot might have a 5 kilogram payload. Well, your CNC mill can handle 2,000 pounds of lateral and vertical cutting forces. And the other thing is kind of what we tell people is for like one-op automation, it literally takes 15 minutes to set up. Just getting it to the point where you're loading the one part in, you're running it, you're loading that same part out, and you're not doing the second op. And I've seen people successful running, 15 parts. 15. 25 is kind of usually the what I would say is the normal break-even point on a one-op, and 50 is where it's like a no-brainer to set it up. And then when we get to the full like 2-op automation, it takes 2 hours to set up. But I think that's about consistent with, by the time you teach a cobot and validate the process, you're about there too.
You also have a conveyor system?
Yeah, so the conveyor is what I actually think is our coolest product. And this is something that a lot of the places we actually have problems just educating the market because people have never seen anything like it before. The conveyor system essentially goes on a 5-axis machine, and we put an automatic door, an auto door on the side window. So the side window comes up, and if you just imagine a conveyor belt laterally going in through that side door, and we just deliver a part on that conveyor belt, a piece of stock, to the end, and there's a little stop, right? So that the conveyor belt keeps going, but the part stops. That then brings that part within the XYZ travel motion of the 5-axis mill. So then we just put a spindle gripper, or we also have vacuum solutions into the 5-axis mill, and then it just grabs the part using the spindle off of the conveyor, puts it into the automatic vise. We move the conveyor out, close the door, and we machine the part. And then we do the opposite. We raise the door, we bring the conveyor in, the spindle drops it off, grabs a new part, and it just rinses and repeats. And that's a super powerful piece of automation because without all this complexity, we're able to deliver systems that are much, much more affordable and much faster ROI. Pretty much all of our things where we're doing the actual implementation, like a turnkey of some variety, we're guaranteeing 1 year or less ROI, which I think our competitors think is crazy. But we're able to do that because our average system cost is like 12% of what our competitors are doing. If it's a Trinity Robotics install or a Halter CNC automation integration, we're coming in at usually around 12% of the overall cost.
And there's always the labor issue, hiring people even to tend machines. So if you can move that out of the picture and know that when that order comes in, you're going to be making parts, I love it. You are really creative, or the people on your team. You had a video up there. You created a really nice packaging out of plywood that a slot and tab looked like a lot of sheet metal. And I just love the innovation. It's not limited to your automation. You're always looking for ways to make things fast and automated and be able to slot and tab that stuff and just put together a plywood box. Boom.
Yeah, I mean, even our conveyor loading system, we have a 5-axis water jet. So our conveyor loading system is actually 3/8 inch precision, like, Mike 6 plate that tabs and slots together, which, like lets us build them in a couple week time span. We powder coat them in-house and they're incredibly rigid. Like long term, I'm sure years from now, we'll turn it into sheet metal, we'll get the cost down. But we love using tab and slot to just solve an issue, right? That first issue is how do we make low volumes of the conveyor? Because we're like a 12-person company. We have to be relatively nimble in terms of building these kind of low volume industrial products, especially the conveyor where the cost to build it is significant. But yeah, I mean, even the box, we've launched so many SKUs in a short enough time span. We kind of have just said, hey, we're going to make sure we deliver a good product, but we're going to try to do it as fast and as nimble as possible. And inevitably, when there's problems with, like our company right now is growing 15% a month, which it's very difficult to deal with in terms of, figuring out new staff, figuring out new systems, figuring out how we deal with product launches. And because that's difficult, our approach has been, get the stuff out the door, make sure to get the customer a quality product. But whenever there's literally any problem, we just replace it, right? Like your vise arrived damaged, replace it. Your gripper has an issue, replace it. And, that's worked really well for us because it lets us see the issues without slowing everything down to a crawl. And then, like this whole thing came from the 2-op automation pallet. It's, it's a $6,800 product. And we have one that, like UPS has been damaging the boxes really severely. And luckily, these things haven't actually been damaged, but we've been getting pictures from customers saying, hey, like this box is messed up. Luckily, the product's okay. So, we said, what can we do? And, the water jet has a ton of water, obviously. So we are like, okay, well, let's use pre-finished plywood. And sure, it's like $150 a sheet, but then we can water jet this nice little, nested thing. And sure, it costs us $150 and maybe it's not sustainable long-term, but, right now it's sustainable to make sure our customers get a good quality product in perfect condition every time. And we'll keep doing that until we find a more cost-effective way.
The building of a company, you just said you're growing 15% a month. You are a member of Entrepreneurs Organization, I
I
saw.
am, yeah.
Yeah. So that's a great way to have a peer group, if nothing else, just to listen to you.
I'm not sure if it
Uh,
was your podcast. I think it was. I think it was either your podcast or I'm trying to think of the other guy's name. It's the like entrepreneur or no, the manufacturing executive. You two talked, right? I think you guys talked about EO, which was actually where I got the introduction to EO in the first place, just kind of speaking of serendipity.
you put yourself in the place where you that happened, and you also are using the EOS system to run your company.
Yeah, and to be honest, I've been kind of struggling to keep up with the growth personally. In EOS, there's this concept of hitting the ceiling, right? You grow the company and you hit the ceiling, which is a metaphorical ceiling of your mindset needs to shift. You need
Hmm.
to get past your personal blocks and the company
Hmm.
blocks that are stopping you from getting to the next step. And the between February and July, we doubled our headcount, and that was super difficult. We still have about half of our revenue as engineering consulting, and we're trying to make the
Mm.
transition, 100% in automation because when I
Hmm.
say the company's growing 15%, really the automation company is growing 15%. And what I think has been difficult for me the past couple of months is, I promoted our senior applications engineer to a director of operations, and I'm still learning how to kind of give him all the responsibilities and take a step back, right? I think that's been difficult for me, and yeah, I mean, the biggest thing that I've really been learning about lately is how to manage cash flow on a company that's growing this fast. It's super difficult, especially now that
Hmm.
I've been kind of historically used to consulting where we're getting some payment usually upfront and then spending down a retainer balance to
Hmm.
now where we're carrying huge amounts of inventory, and then we're not just buying this inventory, we're buying it a month ahead of time because we got to buy the stock, make the parts, put it together, and then we have to try to build it ahead of the projected growth. So EO has been super helpful. I actually had my forum dinner last night, or the little forum plus the forum dinner.
Hmm.
My car window got smashed out and my backpack got stolen. But a big theme of the forum was with me talking about me going through this stage of growth was just me learning to let go, and I feel like that was almost a test of like, okay, your backpack got stolen with your $2,000 laptop and your $500 headphones. It's like, okay, take a deep breath. Sure, I'm already in a cash pinch, but I have the money to pay for this. Like, the company's growing, all the things I want are happening. So I'm still learning to deal with these new problems, and I'm trying right now to break through this next glass ceiling here.
Yeah, it's real, and it's what prohibits a lot of entrepreneurs from growing into larger companies. It's a delegation is a skill, learning to focus your attention on the things that no one else can do, that you're uniquely talented to do, is hard because there's a lot of things that you are probably really good at,
Mhm.
but other people are good at too, and you have to let go of those, even if you don't necessarily like the way that they're doing it, as long as the result is adequate, right?
Yeah, and I read this book called "Buy Back Your Time" literally yesterday, and they have this quote in there that said, someone else doing something that you can perfectly do 80% well is awesome.
It's that's well said for sure.
Yeah, and it's definitely been a journey for me of being okay when something gets handled and it's not the way I would handle it. And I kind of said that earlier, like I kind of evolved from treating the company like it was me to treating it like a child I'm raising, and being okay when that metaphorical child Gimbal Automation here is making decisions that I wouldn't necessarily make as long as they're generally good.
To me, there's a period where you start delegating, and it's maybe the 80%. But as your company grows, as your team grows, and as you as a leader shepherd them, and I use that word because it's a delicate balance, but if you give them enough freedom, what I saw at Rapid was the team started to do things that I was never capable of doing. And not just one person, but so many different areas in the company. And it was so satisfying to be able to shepherd them, give them the guidance and the coaching, and then let them run and create things that made us so successful, but had nothing to do with me. Like, wow. And that's really, I think, what team is all about. And it's not easy as the entrepreneur, the person who starts the company, to let go and trust your team.
Oh
And
yeah.
they will make mistakes. And if you beat them down, you yell at them, and they're not going to try again.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And it's been a process. And I think I'm a lot better at letting go and letting things kind of go the way that they will. And I think a huge thing for me was really within the last, few months, we've started to build out a real leadership team. And that's been really transformational, just knowing like that the excellent machinist is super hard to come by, right? But you need a layer of leadership for that really to be capable, where the team can really thrive, right? Because I think when you hit this kind of 10, 15 head count, you have enough direct reports where it stops being effective. And building out that first stage of the leadership team has really made me, start to cross this bridge where I'm really starting just to trust everything's going to get done, that, our customers are going to get serviced, and they're going to get, everything is going to get done correctly, and their parts are going to run automated the way they're supposed to. And it's still a journey, and I'm sure that, we'll get past this, and then we'll move from these kind of 10 to 15 employee problems to the 20 to 25 employee problems.
Oh yeah, it's it, there's always a new challenge.
Mhm.
Do you have an EOS coach, an outside facilitator?
So yeah, 2 months ago, I actually, we had somebody come in, and it was like, okay, well, it's going to be $6,000 a session. And I kind of knew how much it would cost, but I think the part that surprised me was 18 grand of this is going to be in the next 3 months. And I was kind of like, man, I'm like already struggling to be ahead of our inventory and our growth. Can we just spread this out? And I said, hey, I want to try to self-implement it. And we tried to self-implement it, and honestly, we just failed. Things got really hectic again. We
Yep.
weren't looking. I was making the mistake of getting in the business and not working on the business. And long story short, I had a conversation with our integrator and said, hey, can I just pay you monthly? Can we
Yeah.
split this up so the cash isn't all right up front? And he's like, yeah, sure. Like, okay, well, that solves that problem. So
Yep.
yeah, we tried and we failed to self-implement EOS, but I've seen it in the couple of weeks that we were really serious about it really do wonders for the business. And then, something happens, and then I get flustered and I'm triaging and putting out fires, and my fingers are crossed.
It's a process. It takes practice. It takes repetitions. It will happen. How do you look at financing your growth? Do you seem adverse to venture capital or equity funding? What's your path for funding?
Yeah, and I say all those things, probably from the perspective of someone just starting out, right? I think my tune is definitely changing a little bit, where the growth is fast enough that I definitely have some questions about what's next. We have a credit card that we've essentially been using as a line of credit, right? Because they trust it will pay off the way too high balance, and it's great for the credit card points and everything. But right now, what I've been doing historically is essentially funding the growth out of the profits of the engineering consulting company, because the overhead's a lot lower. We're not carrying inventory.
Yep.
Anything we are buying associated with a customer project is just reimbursed. So that's been the case up until now. But now that we're kind of at that threshold where the automation company is bigger than the engineering consulting, that's kind of stopping as being effective. And so that's kind of the next big question for me is, okay, well, how do I continue this? And I don't really know 100% what the answer to that is, whether it's, leveraging debt. We definitely need to more effectively get and leverage a line of credit to keep up. But there's definitely some questions. The short term, I have like an airplane that I used to fly, and it used to be a real passion of mine. But I woke up after long enough of like, having a fiance and a couple of dogs and being like, I'm super happy, and like this thing is really dangerous. So, at least the super short term, I'm like, okay, I'm going to, sell the airplane, and that'll finance some of the growth. But long term, I'm still figuring that out. And I think that's really one of the big questions of how do I keep up with the growth, especially with IMTS coming up in 25 days or whatever.
Yeah.
We expect that to be a real big boon, and we're getting everything out on time, but it's a struggle already. So, figuring that out as we're growing so fast. And if we're growing 15% a month, that 15% next month is bigger than it was last month. So
I would encourage you to get on board with a bank sooner than later. Rapid, we had some initial investors, family and friends, and then afterwards it was all bank financed. And we grew roughly 32% a year, so less than 15% a month for sure. But that took, because we went under it once, but that took 20% EBITDA to essentially self-fund plus bank debt.
yeah,
That growth. Yeah, it's a good problem to have, right?
yeah, it's a good problem to have, but it's a new problem. It's stressing me out for new reasons, right? I'm super enthusiastic, and I think I don't know what it is about me, but I want to grow. I think I like really believe in the product and what we're doing, and trying to get automation to people that's not 100 grand, right? Go buy another spindle and automate that. And for whatever reason, I just have that thing in me where I just want to grow, and I want to get things done, and playing that balancing act is definitely difficult. And putting my business hat on, and at some point here we'll probably have to pull back and say no, maybe we grow at 7% a month, because likely that might not be sustainable, especially if I want to hold on to the concept of self-funding, even debt financed, right?
I always looked at it because we could have had much more demand than supply at Rapid early on, as that was part of my job as a leader. I thought of it like as the accelerator, and I had to make sure I wasn't flooring it and creating too much demand and killing the shop. But at the same time, I had to make sure there was enough gas, enough pressure on the pedal to give the shop the growth that we're building towards. And it's a delicate balance. The bigger you get, the easier it gets. And that's actually one of the things that drove me, is there are a lot of advantages the bigger you get. You hire more people to do more things because you can afford them now. You can invest in new products, the R&D, and it doesn't destroy your cash flow. So there's a lot of opportunity for you. You mentioned IMTS. You'll probably get a lot of orders there. So it's something to think about now. How are you going to finance the inventory or the demand that's going to be generated?
It's definitely been on my mind. And Jay, that's one thing I just want to say is your podcast has had some of the most like tactical, real job shop business advice that I've seen anywhere. And I just want to say thank you for being that resource. Like there's a lot of good job shop resources and podcasts and YouTube videos, but I think really what sets you apart, bar none, is that tactical business advice and coming through everything at that lens. Especially having gone from Rapid and then doing paperless parts, I've definitely gotten the most practical value out of it. And that I just want to say generally thanks for that.
Thank you. These sort of conversations are fun, and I enjoy the opportunity to hear success stories like yours. Business is such a delicate balance. You have created what appears to me to be just like some home run products, and the downside of that is that success can be really tough in building the business, and some businesses don't make it. So it's a pleasure for me to be able to give some sort of tactical advice that helps you perhaps in one way or another. And how about contact information, website? Where can people find you?
Yeah, it's Gimbal Automation everywhere. That's spelled Gimbel. It's my last name. I'm used to people misspelling it, so just Gimbal Automation with an EL. And then you can reach us at email at sales@gimbalautomation. And then there's Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, all under the same name. You can message us through any of those platforms.
Great. Well, as we wrap up here, anything that we didn't cover you'd like to share or get out there, or any questions for me?
One thing I like to kind of ask everyone is I actually like to ask people what their hesitations are about in-machine automation, because my understanding is a lot of people have questions, and there's a bunch of common ones that are almost always never the actual downsides of in-machine automation. I'm just curious what you think the limitations are, or what parts you might think it's good for, just so I can get another point of view from another person who's been in the industry a long time on you think the issues are, so I can see if they're really aligned with reality.
Well, that's a good question. I think there's always cash flow demands for job shops. And you know that buying another machine, like you said, getting another spindle is a proven solution, as opposed to, all right, I'm going to have to get these parts out. The cobot says it may be.
Mm-hmm.
It says they say they can
They
do
always
it,
say.
but if it doesn't, then I'm hosed, and I'm not going to get the parts out, and I may have to buy another machine, and it's money. So a lot of it comes back to money. I think what I like to do at Rapid was make a lot of small bets, try a lot of things, and you're coming in at a price point that is low enough that it's not going to really hurt a shop to try your technology. If it's not for them, then okay, it's money that's not going to sink the shop. Perhaps for you is even to offer a money back guarantee. And this is just off the top of my
We
head.
actually do that. So we pretty much have a
Hmm.
30-day. If you didn't crash it, return it.
I would even do like, because a lot of times shops get busy with stuff, but give a 90-day return, but have a non-recurring engineering charge, some sort of thing that covers your cost to help them get set up and that. So there's an investment.
Yeah.
Maybe it's $1,000, $2,500 that covers your time in that. And then if for some reason it's not for them after 90 days, because 90 days really, it gives you an opportunity to really prove it or not.
Yeah.
30 days.
And there's something we learned about, the customers, because you mentioned like, job
Yeah.
shops are changing a lot. Like the word job shop is like, I guess 2 words is such a strange thing. And for like the kind of sub 5 machines, sub 10 employee companies, we've kind of realized, hey, the solution is we sell them the little $5,000 one-off automation package. Most of the time, those shops aren't, they want to figure it out themselves. They want to, make like a small bet. And we have kind of like mentally separated that kind of company from, I think, there we try to push, hey, get this $5,000 thing, use our online systems. It's easy, you'll make it work. And then we've kind of separated that mentally from like a customer persona perspective to from the 25 machine plus either aerospace ISO shop or you have your own product, what have you, because we've kind of seen those customers, they're almost always getting turnkeys from us. And for perspective, that kind of means like we made up a phrase semi-turnkey where
Okay.
we do everything, the cam, the full process validation, and we test it and videotape it on our machine, and then we send you like essentially like the
Mm,
detailed documentation on how to install it, and then give you 4 hours of phone support.
love it. Love it.
But with those bigger companies, what we found is they want a solution and they don't even want to deal with it. So like our
Right.
approach to that is that we get them automated for usually about 20 grand. So it's $12,000 or so for the hardware for full two-op automation, and usually $6,000 to $8,000 for the actual turnkey and a little bit for shipping and what have you. And on those customers, what we have done is actually there's a year-long window where we guarantee ROI, and which is an interesting thing to do, but the idea is that we guarantee 1 year ROI because we're confident enough that if you actually use the system, literally the cost of our system is usually in line with like the work holding cost of a cobot. And we have other weird things we've seen. Like we've had a lot of customers. We had one customer in particular who is using these with FANUC robots, right? We're like, hey, just buy a spindle gripper, it'll do the same thing. And they're like, well, I was the advocate to buy these FANUC robots. So they're using the two-op station and the flipping inside the machine even without the spindle grippers. So that's usually what I go back to is like you got to buy the automated work holding anyways. And if it doesn't work, then send us the grippers back and then use that automated work holding for your cobot that you're so convinced will work. But if at the end of the day that you can automate these with spindle grippers, you're 12 grand in per machine, as opposed to if you're automating with the cobot, even without an integrator, still paying 8 grand for the work holding and then 45 for the robot and who knows how much for the end effectors and so on.
Yeah. Yeah. To me, as an owner, this is a pretty low risk experiment. And if it works, awesome. If not, okay. And with the warranty, it's like, okay, guys, make sure you try it out in time. Well, thanks so much. Really a fun story, Michael. You are making your passion your living. You're able to create jobs for other folk. I think you're advancing American manufacturing and just love what you're doing. So,
Well, thanks so much.
yeah.
I'm really honored to be here. I love the show. I'm an avid listener, and I'm just super glad to have the opportunity and chat. And hopefully, one of these days at IMTS or some conference, we run into each other.
I'm thinking you should have a booth at the Paperless Parts Power event next year, because the shop owners, we had hundreds of folks this year, and these are the innovators. These are the people who are bringing innovative technology in-house. And I think if they saw that little machine I saw you setting up, that you're bringing
Hmm.
into IMTS, and it's a 2-day event, so they would have a lot of time to get hands-on and look at it. So whether it's IMTS or at Power, yeah, look forward to meeting you.
Yeah, for sure.
Definitely.
And send us the power details.
Okay, we'll do. All right. If you've been listening, again, this is so much fun for me, because this is what I love to do, is chat with shop owners, entrepreneurs who are making it happen, who are taking their passion, their dream, making it reality. And I think what Michael's created here is something that I definitely would give a shot at Rapid. So I guess that's my takeaway for you. What's stopping you from looking at automation in your machine and trying out a simple concept like this? Until next time, keep those spindles turning and those lasers cutting. Have a great day. Thanks for listening to the Job Shop Show podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to subscribe so future episodes are automatically downloaded directly to your device. You can also leave an honest rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Not only do I read every single one, it also helps me understand what content matters most to you. Thanks again for listening to the Job Shop Show.